Hello everyone, how's it going? It's your boy Skilled Fawn, and today we're going to be talking about Lies of P, a relatively new Souls-like game. Lies of P is the equivalent of Sekiro and Bloodborne being fused together in a dilapidated world filled with evil puppets. Warning, as there will be spoilers. Before we get into the video, hit the like button and subscribe for more content. I stream almost every day and post videos weekly. Check the links in the description for more. For those of you who are unfamiliar with me, I will give a brief introduction. I've been playing Souls-like games since my introduction to the genre at the release of Dark Souls 3. Since then, I have really enjoyed the genre and games. Elden Ring is the most notable game in the series, as this was the starting point for my content creation job. I have completed over 20 challenges in Elden Ring and many others on various games like Dark Souls 1, Sekiro, Battlefront 2, and many more. Now, on to the video. I recently played through Lies of P for the first time and afterwards completed New Game Plus and a couple of challenge runs. Here I will be talking about my experience with the game, likes and dislikes, and what I hope for in a DLC or sequel. So starting off, we're going to talk about my experience with the game. I want to set the theme and area that the game takes place in for those who are unfamiliar. As I mentioned in the intro, Lies of P is a conglomeration of Sekiro and Bloodborne. It takes place in a city called Krat, where Ergo was discovered to be a power source for many things, but mostly to be the energy source for puppets. Puppets in this world are maids, workers, soldiers, and many other variations. After some time, there was something called the puppet frenzy, which caused every puppet to go mad, attacking humans. Also during this time, a disease was running rampant. This disease was from Ergo and was called the petrification disease, turning humans and creatures alike into monsters. Now that we have the basic setting and theme described, I want to talk about my thoughts on them. I really do enjoy the world of Lies of P. I think it's really interesting to see how puppets could take over an area, destroying humans and creatures alike. The player being essentially Pinocchio is really awesome too. I also like the main protagonist being able to eventually hear the puppets talk in New Game Plus. That's something I definitely recommend to you guys, is to play through it twice. As you go through the game, you will see many different areas, and each one is more interesting than the previous one. My favorite area is probably the final area because I like a lot of the bosses there and the story behind them. Another favorite is the main area of Krat / the hotel. In Souls-like games, there is usually a safe haven. In Dark Souls 3, this was Firelink Shrine. In Sekiro, it was the dilapidated temple and the tower. In Lies of P, the safe haven is Hotel Krat. The buildings and architecture within the game is pretty well made and is enjoyable to look at. Now, I have had some rendering issues with certain areas, and I figured I should mention this, though it is very minor. Next, we'll talk about my likes and dislikes for the game, and we'll list them on the screen now. And I'll go through them just in like a few sentences, maybe a little bit more. So starting off with the likes, I like a lot of the bosses in the game. The bosses in Lies of P are really cool and have a lot of variety to them. From puppets, monsters, to humans, there are many different types and they're really fun to fight. There's a lot of weapon variety in Lies of P. These weapons can be dismantled and added to different weapons. This allows for many different weapon variations to complement different playstyles. The P organ upgrades are really cool. There are many different types. For the most part, you can choose your upgrade path for the abilities you want instead of the game forcing you one path. The special grindstone allows for status effects to be applied to the player's weapon. This is a non-consumable, and there are many different types such as the acid spray, electric blitz, and many more. My personal favorite is the one where when the player blocks and like is holding block, it will give you the perfect parry, even if you were just holding it, which is really nice. Builds up the groggy meter. Next, we have the concept of a second currency in the game. I like having the golden tree give leaves every 10 minutes. It is a neat idea, though I will mention the dislikes of this and extrapolate more soon. The setting and theme of the game is very interesting. It is very enjoyable to look at and to experience. The concept of puppet/technology taking over humanity is applicable to talking points that people bring up in our world society. The last thing I want to mention is lying/telling the truth. Another thing that I enjoyed was the protagonist's ability to lie or tell the truth. This will affect NPC quest lines and give the player the choice to do good or evil. This is something familiar in Soulsborne games, but I think is best in Lies of P. These are some of the many things that I liked and enjoyed while I was playing through the game. Now we will talk about the things that I dislike. Starting off, we have combos from bosses are insane. Bosses in Soulsborne games can be difficult, insanely difficult. For example, Melania, Blade of Mikola, Lady Maria, Orphan of Kos, Dark Eater, Midir, Ishin, the Sword Saint, and many more. These bosses have crazy movesets and attacks, but generally aren't more than maybe 8 attacks in one combo. In Lies of P, the bosses have way more variety to their attacks and can combo for an extremely long time. I think a great example of this is Laxia the Complete. She is one of, if not my favorite boss in Lies of P, but she can attack 10 plus times in one combo, which is fine, but I like to think about more casual players and their experience. I think this is one reason why Lies of P is much harder than Sekiro and Bloodborne. Bosses and their attacks are very similar to Elden Ring for the fact that depending on how close you are to the boss and other factors, they will keep the combo going or stop to start a new one. Most legions in the game are pretty lackluster in my opinion. They're a really cool concept, but generally are pretty bad. I've used almost all of them and really liked only the shield and the grapple/spear gun. Almost all the other ones are extremely situational or are weak. Parrying is really the only way to build a groggy meter. Parrying in Lies of P is similar to Sekiro, where the player needs to keep parrying in order to build up the stagger/groggy meter. Once the meter is filled, white bar around the boss's health, the player is able to do a heavy attack and stun the target. Afterwards, the enemy will be vulnerable to a fatal blow. This is the main way to build it up, though using the Legion arm and doing a lot of damage quickly is another way, though it takes much longer. It could have been great if dodging attacks somehow would slowly increase the groggy meter, but maybe not as much as parrying would. But that's just, I don't know, something I thought of. Wishstone/cube is pretty lackluster. Another thing I disliked was the cube. I mentioned in the like section that I like the concept of the golden tree, especially since it gave the player a secondary currency. Unfortunately, the currency takes a long time to obtain, and you can boost the tree so it actually takes a lot less time, but the things that you buy are extremely weak. For instance, the player could buy a wish stone that will heal the player over time. When you use it, it lasts around maybe 20 to 30 seconds before stopping. In Elden Ring, when you use a mixed flask for the same thing, it would heal the player for much longer. Mixed flask and cube are very similar, so that's why I use it as an example. Certain areas are boring or fairly boring. Another thing was that some areas are extremely tedious and boring. Now, this is something that is pretty common in most Souls-like games, but in Lies of P is a lot more egregious. Especially in the last area, it has some very cool bosses in the zone, but generally is a pain to run through as it takes a ton of time, and you're just looking at the same thing over and over. Other areas can be very plain or just have limited enemies to fight. Vectors are really only useful for baiting, and other players should be able to be summoned so you can play co-op. Maybe this is something, but I have not seen that from my experience. But they're really just useful for bait. It is not wise to rely on them for damage, and they will die quite quickly. It would have been great if the player could summon a Spectre and it was an actual player online. I think the way From Software does it with half heals when you join someone would be great, but I'm disappointed with the Spectre's state right now. I'm happy at the very least that it is there and it gives the player the choice to summon them. Lastly, certain areas require an enemy to be killed to proceed. These are usually non-bosses, or I guess you could technically classify them as like mini bosses, but they don't have a health bar that has a name over it. So yeah, now usually these areas are locked off because a boss is there or a key is needed, but there are many areas where neither is required to progress. Instead, it is a basic enemy with a health of a mini boss. These generally slow the game down and they can be back to back. Next, I want to talk about things that I have mixed thoughts on. And these are the linear game. Lies of P is a very linear game compared to the other Souls-likes, and I equate its progression path to Dark Souls 3 progression route. I think for newer players this is great, as it is more intuitive to figure out, but it is more bare bones and generally takes longer. I like Dark Souls 1, Elden Ring, and Bloodborne's world because it gives the player the freedom to choose their path and gun for a specific item. Lies of P is more restrictive in that there is only one path, so you don't have many choices on ways to progress. And lastly, since the world is very linear, it will generally take a lot longer for each playthrough. Now in Lies of P, yes, you don't have to fight every boss, but technically you do. Most bosses are at a progression point, so it is required to kill them. Elden Ring, Sekiro, and the other Soulsborne games generally allow the player to have a lot more options to their progression path, which usually results in less time for each playthrough. These are some of the many likes, dislikes, and mixed thoughts that I had on the game. There are definitely more things that could be praised or disapproved of, but overall the game is really fun and worth your time. Next, we'll talk about what I'm hopeful for in the future, and this is the last thing. The last thing that I want to talk about is what I hope for in the future. I really hope for a DLC or sequel to the game. I was taken aback after my first playthrough, and I'm very interested to see what the devs have up their sleeves. At the end of the game, they hinted at Dorothy in the story of the Wizard of Oz, so we will have to see. I'm impressed by what the game has accomplished and hope to see more soon. It seems that there will be more coming, as this game is popular among Soulsborne fans. If there is anything new that releases for this game, expect me to cover it. Now, thank you guys for coming and watching the video. If you did enjoy this, like, comment, and or subscribe to help support me and the channel. This also pushes out the video to others. I will be streaming soon, doing challenge runs, so click the link in the description and swing by to say hello. Thanks again and hope to see you soon. This is Skilled Fawn, and I'm out.